Hi everyone, this is Nail and welcome to the Tiny Studio. If you are returning, how's it going? How has your week been? I hope that you're having a really good and progressive week. If this is your first time hanging out with me here in the Tiny Studio, welcome, welcome, welcome. Don't forget to subscribe so that you'll be notified whenever I pop up in the Tiny Studio. This is Let's Crochet and Chat. Crochet and Chat is we just crochet along and talk about whatever is going on in the world or in my life or what have you. So let's get to it. I haven't been on recently here in the studio to crochet and chat for a little bit, but that does not mean that I have not been crocheting, because I have. My youngest child just graduated from high school, so I've been kind of busy with all of those things that moms and dads do around graduation season. So I am back in the Tiny Studio, and I am back to share some of what I've been working on. So there have been maybe 3 projects, and I'm guessing that most people who crochet can vouch with me or for me on this, what I'm getting ready about regarding what I'm about to say. And the thing is, I'm always working on something. I'm working on maybe 4 or 5 projects at the same time, which means that when I get a little, I don't want to say tired, but when I've lost that mojo for one project, I sit it down and I move on to the next project that I'm working on. So currently there are maybe 4 or 5 projects that I'm working on at this time. But one of the most important projects that I'm working on is the beautiful Afghan that my future daughter-in-law and my son have commissioned me to create for them, design and create. And that's what I am working on right now. So today's crochet and chat, we will be crocheting, and I will be crocheting on that project. So let me go grab my yarn and my yarn bowl and my crochet hook, and why don't you go and grab your whips or UFOs in progress, and let's crochet and chat. I'll be right back. Do 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 do. Oh. Okay. Uh-oh. Ooh, child. I know this yarn did not get caught up in this label. Oh, it got stuck on the glue. Oh my god. Okay, did I get it off? That just snagged the yarn, so I'm going to have to cut that part off. Excuse me. So this Afghan that I'm working on, it's made with Hobby Lobby's Yarn Bee True Colors, and here it is, and it's in the color of black and silver or gray. And I believe the last time we chatted, I was working on this project. So here she is. She's grown a little bit. And I am a freeform crocheter, so right now there are three different stitch patterns in this Afghan, and currently, and I'm going to have to put this in a bag. I usually put most of my projects in one of my plastic bags to keep them, keep them from being snagged, and things that happen here in the tiny studio. I want to protect the fabric, so I usually keep it, when I'm done, I used to keep them put away. However, for this one, I've been keeping it in my crochet bag, and I just noticed that there are some snags going on, so I may not be able to continue to keep this in my crochet bag because, I'm using a larger fabric, excuse me, a larger yarn. I'm using a chunky yarn, and what I don't want to happen is I don't want too many snags and things like that to occur, because that's going to interfere with the integrity of the Afghan. So I need to be careful with that. So on this particular row I'm working on, this will be I think the last time we talked, I was working on the moss stitch. So the black row here is the moss stitch, and this row at the top, and I cannot think of what this stitch is. I'm going to have to, here's another thing that I am starting to do, which is very important when you're a free form crocheter like myself, or just, if you like to work on Afghans, is to never forget what the stitch is. So that when you come back to your work, you will automatically know. So, in the past when I first started crocheting, of course we start off crocheting different things, and we use a basic stitch, which may be single crochet and double crochet or half double crochet. For me, I like combination stitches. So I'm using, the moss stitch, the star stitch, or something of that nature, or I'm doing front post double crochet, front post half double crochet, things of that nature. So this stitch pattern that I'm working on contains half double crochet and single crochet. So that is what I'm working on right now on this particular row, and let me show you how that works. Now, if you know the name of that stitch, feel free to drop down in the comment section and let me know, remind me, refresh my memory. So here I go. How this stitch works is I have this is half double crochet. If you're not familiar with half double crochet, here we go. Half double crochet contains, you already have one loop on your hook, yarn over till you have 2 loops on the hook, go into your stitch, bring in your yarn. Now you have 3 loops on your stitch, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops, and that's half double crochet. And then my next stitch is single crochet, which is 1 loop on your hook, go into your stitch, grab your yarn, pull up, you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. That's single crochet. So once again, the stitch pattern that I'm working on for this particular row, and what I'm doing is I'm using one particular color yarn for that's my pattern. So my pattern is I'm using one yarn for maybe about, it looks like 4 rows. So every 4 rows I change color. So, which for me, with the chunky yarn that I'm using, is a full skein. All right, so here we go again. Half double crochet. I already have a loop on my hook. Yarn over. Now I have 2 loops on the hook. Go through my stitch, grab my yarn, pull my yarn through the stitch. Now I have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over. I have 4. Pull through all. That's half double crochet. Single crochet. I start off with one loop on my hook. Put my hook through the stitch. Grab my yarn, pull my yarn through the stitch. Now I have 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over, pull through 2. There you go. And that is the pattern that I'm working on today. And I have, let me see, I have about this much yarn left from this skein. So when this yarn, this skein is completed, then I'll switch over to the black. And I'm already thinking about the pattern that I want to use, the stitch pattern I want to use for the black. And I was thinking about doing maybe 2 rows of front post half double crochet, and I think that will look so great on this Afghan. It'll give it even more texture and it'll just look so cool. I'm also thinking about doing a really cool zigzag stitch within this Afghan as well. When it's completed, and I really should keep notes. Did I talk about that already? I think I did. How you should really keep accurate notes on each of the projects that you work on so that you'll remember where you left off at when you pick up your work, especially if you're like me and you're working on 4 or 5 different projects at a time. You want to keep note of those things. So anyhow, I have some ideas of where I want to take this Afghan, and I do want to include a few front post stitches in this pattern. And I also have been thinking about what I want the border to look like, and most of my borders are always some type of shell type thing because I just love them, shell and ruffles. And so I was thinking about doing maybe a shell on one corner, excuse me, a shell border on one side, maybe a peacoat on the other side, and maybe some ruffles on another side. So it's just, I'm thinking about what I want to do, or maybe to all be a peacoat border. I don't know yet, but I'm excited. And this is such a great project to work on. And I'm so excited to have the opportunity to create something for my son and my daughter, my future daughter-in-law, because it's a work of love. And you know, it does take time to work on them. And I pick it up and I usually work on it when I'm watching TV or something like that. Because it helps to, while I'm working crocheting, it also allows me to be able to have other types of mental stimulation while I'm working. So anyhow, speaking of mental stimulation, my daughter graduated from high school this week. As a matter of fact, she graduated the day after the shooting in Ulvade, Texas, and which would be for me right now, which would be yesterday. And I'm probably going to post this video the day after her graduation, which will be Wednesday, May the 26th. And I'm still feeling kind of not so great, even though I'm really happy and excited that my youngest child has graduated from high school. For me, there was a damper on that moment because of what happened at the elementary school. And I'm sure that the parents who were in attendance like myself at the high school graduation, I'm sure that their thoughts were like mine. And I'm sure that their thoughts and their prayers and their hearts were on the parents who lost their children in Ulvade, Texas. And what kept running through my mind was the fact that those parents will not get to see their children graduate from high school. And that was a very sobering fact. And while I was happy and excited at my daughter's graduation, and I cried, remembering the years that, remembering her childhood, remembering her birthday was on the 21st. So that was a lot, of melancholy for me. And on the heels of that, she graduates from high school. So as a mom, this was my last child. I have 4. So this was my last child, my baby. And so it meant a lot to me. But then to have such a tragedy to be forever linked on such a special occasion as this beautiful transition of children getting ready to embark on their life as young adults, it's heartbreaking. And while we're celebrating, of course, our minds and hearts are filled with that anguish for the parents who lost their children on Tuesday. And not only that, there is a sense of relief that yes, that thing that gnaws at us parents when we send our kids to school every day, there's that relief that we won't have to say a silent prayer, that saying goodbye to them in the morning might be the last time we actually see our children again. So I've had children in school since the 90s. And when Columbine happened, that shook this country. It shook me. I mean, I've heard of school shootings. Who haven't heard of school shootings? But Columbine was a little something different. It was like a planned hit on a school and a school community. And that was something that was heartbreaking and shocking and terrifying and all of those things. And here we all was thinking that there would never be another And there's still shooters, murderers going into public schools and murdering children in mass. So all throughout my children's school career, I've always had that fear in the back of my mind. Whenever my son's high school will go on a lockdown, fear. So while I am excited that my daughter is graduating or graduated from high school, it's wonderful. I feel relief, and I also feel guilty, and I feel prayerful for the parents whose children are still or will still be a part of the public school system next fall. Because it's never truly that far away from our minds and our hearts that when we send our children to school, we expect them to come home in one piece. I remember when I was a young person, attending school, and the things that our parents expected from us when they sent us to school. They expected us to return home from school dressed the way we were when we left in the morning. They expected our clothing to be intact, no rips, tears, holes. They expected us to return home the way we left. Our parents didn't worry about having to go through the horror of submitting your DNA to identify the remains of your child. Because your child is not going to return home the way you sent them to school that morning. Our parents didn't have to worry about that. I did. And then before this shooting occurred, not even 2 weeks before that, we were dealing with the killer who walked into Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, and decided to unload his weapon on unsuspecting shoppers and employees. So there's that thing that your child or yourself, a loved one, can just be out doing their thing at the grocery store, picking up a gallon of milk, picking up some bread, picking up some juice, picking up something for dinner, and become a victim of a mass shooting. So even though I may feel relief that my daughter is no longer an attendee of public school, let's be honest, the threat is not over. Her life, my life, her dad's life, her siblings' life lives, her sister's life, excuse me, we're still all in jeopardy. We're still all in danger. Because the way this is working, these killers could strike anywhere. I went to the movies to see Doctor Strange. Of course, there was a conversation that was had about knowing where the exits are. And not becoming aware of where the exits are just in case of a fire. No, knowing where the exits are just in case a shooter decides he wants to light the place up. So you have to have a contingency plan just to go to the movies. This country has got to do better. And then once again, you hear politicians saying, oh, you're not going to take our guns. We have rights. You're politicizing matters. Here's the thing. Until we get a hold on this mass killing, this mass shooter situation, this gun violence situation, this is always going to be a political matter. Because let's be honest, the people that we elect to be our voices in Washington and in our own local state government, they're not speaking for us. They're supposed to be our voices, and they're not speaking for us. They're speaking for their own agendas and political gain. This is not only a political matter, this is a matter of humanity in this country. And unfortunately, I don't think anything will ever be done. I think as Americans, especially as a Black American who lives daily with the threat of domestic terrorism, I think Americans in general are going to have to live with the threat of domestic terrorism meeting them wherever they may be. And see, here's the thing to me that I always find haunting. And it's the fact that when white Americans fail to understand the plight of minorities in this country and the way we feel threatened by domestic terrorism, because they don't really until they understand it. And because it's taking them so long politically to get it, these terroristic acts on domestic soil proliferate. They continue. They continue. And then they begin to touch white Americans. Because you see, when Black Americans were getting lynched and just terrorized, burned out of their homes, tortured, raped, maimed, white Americans had the attitude of, that's not my problem. And if you want to change things, it's going to take time. That was the attitude of white Americans in this country. And it's this attitude that has allowed certain things to happen in this country where it's not just affecting Black people anymore or minorities anymore. Now it's affecting white folks. Remember that shooter out in Oxford, Michigan? Now shooters are popping up in other places. How about the guy who killed up a whole bunch of people in Las Vegas at a music festival? Now domestic terrorism is hitting everybody. Everybody is being affected. And guess what? Instead of politicians used to say, well, you know, it's going to take time. Now politicians are saying everybody needs to be armed. Everybody needs to be armed. They're not even saying, well, you know, things will get better, it just takes time. No, they're not even saying that anymore. And as a matter of fact, because of capitalism and greed, many politicians are turning a blind eye to this situation. They're just going on about their business. Worried about their agendas and their many homes and boats and country club memberships. They're not concerned with you or I. They may tell us they are, but once they get up in office, they're not. And we the people, we don't hold them accountable either. We just go to the ballot and we elect people or re-elect them based on name recognition. Not based on what they should be doing and what they didn't do. When they get up there in Washington, you can barely get in touch with them. They don't want to come into your community to help you. They only come around when they want something. And that's usually every 4 to 6 years when they want you to re-elect them. There shouldn't have been another school shooting on the level of Columbine. That shouldn't have happened. But it did. There shouldn't have been another Parkland massacre. but it was. And you know what? America is going to continue like this. Mark my words. America is going to continue just as it is. And I hate to sound pessimistic, but it's true. What this country is due for is a reckoning. Because this country was born on violence and domestic terrorism. That's what this country is made of. Blood. And this country will continue down this road until the people, the ancestors, I should say, or until the descendants of the people who brought blood and shame and violence, extreme violence, until those people recognize what they have done and decide to change things. But I have little faith that that will happen. Because if you don't acknowledge your past, you're going to be doomed to repeat it. And with all this talk about not teaching the true history of America in schools, these next coming generations of the descendants of the founding fathers, the people who came to this land and perpetuated all types of criminal acts of violence and domestic terrorism upon the people who already lived here, the same people who also went over to Africa and kidnapped or involved themselves in the human slave trade and brought all these people over to the Americas. I mean, until that story is told and accurately told, until that history is fully recognized and taught to these coming generations, domestic terrorism will continue to flourish. It just will. We don't want no CRT. We don't want these things taught in our schools. We don't want no textbooks with no CRT. All CRT is the theory that racism is systemic and woven through the foundation and the foundational laws of this country. That's what CRT is. That's what critical race theory really is. And until we talk about it, until this country starts to make repairs on itself, then domestic terrorism is coming to a grocery store, a school, a movie theater, a music festival, a mall near you. Until we do something about these guns, and I'm not talking about your regular rifle. I'm not talking about the guns that we use and that we need to perhaps protect ourselves and our property, or that we may use for hunting animals. I'm not talking about them type of guns. I'm talking about the ones that can kill up 20 people in 60 seconds. I'm talking about the guns that's used for hunting people, not the guns that's used for hunting animals. Until we get rid of those guns, those type of guns for hunting people, then we will always have this problem. And guess what? You could disagree with me. Feel free to disagree. But in my life outside of the tiny studio, I'm a journalist. And I reported on Columbine when it happened. So you can disagree, but your disagreement would be simply because you want to be right. Because this doesn't have anything to do with not having or being, or the right of taking away your citizen right to bear arms. This is not about that. But this is about the type of arms that we bear in this country. And I'm also going to throw in the fact of the things that we allow our children to play with, such as video games that are violent, where in these video games, the person that's playing, the player, is a shooter, a killer. And because some of these video games are so lifelike, because people play these video games all the time. It has an influence, a power over your brain. And that's why these people who are killers, that's why they are able to commit the carnage that they are able to commit, because they've been doing it all the time while they were playing these video games. Their brain has been programmed to point a gun, aim a gun at somebody's head and blow it off. That's something that we all need to think about as well. But because this country is a capitalistic society that's based off of wealth, based off of acquiring money, and not about the welfare and the good of its citizens or customers or consumers, then there are going to continue to be video games that portray extreme violence, gross violence. As Run DMC said back in the 80s, it's like that, and that's the way it is. Cool. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Let's Crochet and Chat. I sure did have a lot to chat about. I hope you were able to get a little work done today. And I was able to, I finished the first row that I began to work on at the beginning of this episode. And now I am on the second row of, well, it's really not the second row, but I've started a whole new row. So the next time we see each other and we chat, I will be working on something else. Or maybe I'll be working on this, and maybe I'll show you the progress of this beautiful Afghan in progress. Maybe I'll show you the progress in another episode of Let's Crochet and Chat. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Don't forget to subscribe and like, because by subscribing, you'll know when I'm in the tiny studio to chat it up. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, okay? I'm Nail. Bye-bye.